Welcome back from lunch. What I did last year was I gave the EndNote talk, and it was entitled Economics and Exploration, a bit of historical perspective. And what happened was that I had essentially tried to propose some analogies between where we are right now in our era of exploration and our historical example from the great age of discovery that started with Columbus and went for several hundred years. And there's some interesting analogies, and this is what I talked about last year. But I got a question in the question and answer period, and someone asked, well, maybe the great age of Western exploration was actually not the best analogy for where we are. That one of the problems with our age of exploration is that we had a number of unintended consequences, like killing a fifth of the world's population because of the Columbian exchange of diseases. And so perhaps others did a better job, explored with less disruption and fewer externalities. And so I thought that was an interesting question, because I'm always open for looking at better models of historical analogs. So I looked at this, and there are a few that come to mind. The Ming Treasure voyages in the 1500s, the voyages of the Polynesian navigators, and even the migrations of humans into new territories. And there's actually data that is relevant to our current situation in all of these things. And what I did last time was I applied some economic principles, because in my sordid past I was an economist before I decided to go crazy and take a 50% cut in lifetime earnings and become a geologist. And a planetary scientist on top of that. So what you do is an economist looks at a series of factors to determine the incentives and to basically quantify and put into a mental picture, a mental framework, any sort of economic activity, and exploration is one of these things. You look at risk return. Investors, and that's what we're doing here, is as a society we're investing in exploration, assesses expected return, and you discount that return by associated risks. You look at investment and entry costs. Are there barriers? Legal, physical barrier like an ocean, like gravity wells, to entry or high initial investments that are required. You look at opportunity costs. Opportunity costs in economics are defined as what's the next best alternative to your proposed action or investment. And you look at externalities. Externalities are just the unintended costs and consequences of your actions, and also who bears those costs. A good example of externalities are burning coal, for instance. The guys who pay for and consume the coal don't bear the externalities, because one of the externalities of coal is that something like 5,000 excessive respiratory caused deaths in the United States every year. That's an externality where the people that take the benefit do not bear the costs. So let's start with the Ming Treasure voyages. This was actually really an amazing period in the 1400s. The Ming were at the height of their power and decided that they wanted to establish dominance over the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. And this guy, Admiral He, led 7 major expeditions. Now, just to give you a sense of this is the flagship, the Ming flagship. At the same scale, that's the ship that Magellan circumnavigated the globe on. So just to give you a relative scale of investment, probably those sitting in the back can't actually see this, but that's the ship right there. This is a very big ship, and it worked just fine. Chinese junks are actually pretty good technology. 62 major ships of that class. A total of almost 30,000 personnel on most of these voyages. The problem was this wasn't really exploration. These trading routes have been known for centuries. What this was power projection. And what Admiral He did was he went around and he dabbled in local politics. Having a fleet that's an order of magnitude bigger than some minor princeling with 30,000 troops at your back makes you a powerful force in local politics. And that's what he did. And he voyaged all over the Indian Ocean. So if you look at this in the same economic framework, this is not really exploration for risk return. It's not trade, it's power projection. It's a military expedition. Investment entry. This was a very expensive sort of thing to do. It's the analogy today is a carrier battle group. And carrier battle groups do real economic work. They encourage trade by encouraging security. Opportunity cost. Transport costs were relatively low. You had well-developed maritime technology, so that's not so bad. But wages in China were pretty high relative to wages in places like India or the Indonesian archipelago. But this was a military expedition. Externalities. Proved security for Chinese trade. However, it was expensive and politically risky. Having random admirals go around and dabble in local politics can end up being kind of dangerous, as we have learned. Also, this became a pawn in palace intrigues. And I don't know if this is a lesson for NASA or not, but it turns out that the explorers were actually all eunuchs. So I don't know what lesson to take away from that, but it was interesting. So, Polynesian navigators. Now, this is an amazing thing. This is Polynesian. The spread of the Polynesians across the Pacific is one of the great triumphs of human ingenuity, because basically Polynesians are genetically related to the Aboriginal population of Taiwan. And so basically they started out over here and spread all the way through the Pacific. And started about 3000 BC and started populating islands across the Pacific in very long distance travel. And the climax was the settlement of Hawaii up there and the settlement of New Zealand. As I said, this is an amazing technology that they developed. Long distance deep water navigation. Stable, durable shipping technology. And the ability to actually transfer what is a working ecology to new areas of settlement, because they took their ecology with them. So, analyzing this, risk return. Being on a small island with all the inherent resource and land limitations, nothing brings that into sharper focus than having a rising population and extremely limited land. It turns out that if you look at the anthropology, and I just finished an interesting book on this, basically all of these societies were very violent, because what's happening is with very limited resources, people are clashing over these things. Anthropologists had always thought that the island cultures were very peaceful, but they only showed up and studied Margaret Mead, for instance, showed up in Samoa and started studying the Samoans in the 1930s. But they'd been living under European colonial imposed rule for 50 years now. And the Samoans were all in these peaceful villages and having a good time. And she didn't notice that almost every hill had a fort built on it. And it had been enough generations that people had forgotten that endemic warfare. But if you actually are able to recognize the archaeological markers for a warfare-based society, like abundant hill forts, like huge caches of weapons and throwing stones, it becomes fairly obvious. And that's what archaeologists have been finding in all these islands. And also, have you ever wondered why there are so many Samoans in the NFL? These guys are big. And it's not because, well, you know, we're very carefully selectively breeding for big Samoans. It's just small guys, small Samoans got killed more easily than big ones. If your level of technology is a stick with a stone tied on it, it helps to be big. So investment entry costs. New land, if you can find it, is very attractive. And also the Polynesians move their ecology with them. So basically all you need is this very robust canoe technology that they have. And you can just toss in everything you need, which is essentially dogs, pigs, breadfruit, things like that. And your opportunity costs and transportation costs are very low. Basically, the surplus in Polynesian society is people. And if you're on a limited resource base, that surplus is going to smash into that limited resource base really fast. Now, the externalities on this are quite bad. Since they move their ecology with them, the native ecologies got hammered. And basically, you had major extinctions wherever they went. I can actually see a fairly strong case for this. Because do you really want to share an island with a 500-pound flightless bird? Probably not. This is just something I cribbed out of a archaeological paper that showed that these flightless birds were doing just fine right up until the advent of Polynesian colonization, and then the populations crashed because the Polynesians very quickly hunted them to extinction. There used to be crocodiles on New Caledonia, Fiji, and Samoa. Do you really want to share your lagoons with crocodiles? I can see a reason for that. Hawaii used to have huge herds of ground grazing ducks. But one of the problems, of course, is if your ecology is pigs, chickens, and rats came with these guys, any ground-dwelling birds are going to be gone really fast. And so the externality here is that you essentially revolutionize and overturn the existing ecology. Take a look at other pre-Columbian settlement of the Americas in Australia, Madagascar. And what you get, you don't have a lot of data on what's going on, but the archaeological data is pretty clear. Basically, the megafauna were rapidly extinguished when humans showed up. Now, remember that the Earth is coming off the Ice Age. And so the megafauna is going to be under pressure. But 150,000 years ago, you had about 150 genera that were larger than 45 kilos. About 10,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age, when you completed human settlement of North and South America, 2/3 of those were gone. And so before the humans showed up in North America, you had mammoths and giant beavers, but you also had horses and camels. Horses went extinct in North America very rapidly, and they weren't reintroduced until Cortez. And once horses got back into this ecology, their populations exploded very rapidly because this is just an ideal place for horses. But basically, this is, unless the megafauna has grown up with humans, like in Africa, and they're fairly used to humans, wherever humans show up in virgin terrain, the megafauna just collapses. So this is Australia, and this is during the Ice Age. So there's really no climate change here. This is all the influx of humans. North America just collapsed. Madagascar was actually settled by sea from Indonesia. And again there, Megafauna collapsed. You get the same story. South America, remember there was no major glaciation in South America. Lost 46 out of the 58 genera of large mammals with the advent of humans. So you get the same story every place where humans expanded into new ranges. In Madagascar, you lost 90% of the megafauna. Cyprus used to have species of dwarf elephants and pygmy hippos. Those went away really fast. Same story with the Indian Island oceans, the Caribbean islands. Basically, when the humans show up, there is this unintended consequence, sort of a planetary protection issue. Just so that you don't feel so bad, this is the Irish elk. Its antlers weighed 90 pounds. 10% of its body weight went into antlers. So I don't really take the blame for this one. Anyway, so a few other thoughts. ISRU. This is something that I've been thinking about since the last talk. This is a common problem in the age of exploration. Because if you sail across the ocean, your expedition is basically limited by the amount of food you can carry. And so a serious problem for all these expeditions was ship repair, crew replacement, and food. This is the gear ratio that we're talking about all the time in the flexible architecture. You simply can't carry enough food and supplies from Europe. That really limits your stay. And so basically the very first thing that exploring countries did was establish an advanced base to support further exploration. Columbus's first voyage, he left 35 of the crew in Hispaniola with orders to go plant food so that he could extend his next expedition based on the food supplies they were going to supply. It didn't work out that way. That's another story. But this is a common theme. And what the Spanish did very early on was establish substantial advanced bases. Santiago de Cuba was where Cortez left from on his expedition to Mexico. It was already a central supply hub for the Spanish Caribbean. Manila served that role for the Far East. All the other European exploring countries did the same thing. New England for the English possessions, Goa for Portugal and India, Cape Town and Java for the Dutch. This is a common theme. You've quickly realized that you can't get anywhere without ISRU. Another thing to remember is the resource curse. And this is something that economists talk about a lot, but that almost nobody pays attention to. It turns out that resource-rich companies tend to have less economic growth and poorer development outcomes. And you can probably think of a few recent examples. What happened to Spain is that the influx of cash and silver, and basically the wealth of the Americas, tripled the supply of precious metals in the world. Tripled. And what happened was that allowed for more imports. It damaged local industries, and it caused huge unemployment. It basically incentivized growing a huge government bureaucracy that increases the opportunities for graft, corruption, and regulation. It encouraged political and military overreach. So for some reason, the Spanish started worrying about the religious attitudes of people in Holland. And it also gave a strong incentive for labor and resources to go to the natural resource sector. Result from Spain was very bad. In a sense, Spain is only now getting over the problems caused by the wealth of the Americas, thanks to being in the European Union. So, quick summary. These are essentially the same slides I showed last year. Externalities are very important and often very poorly understood. Our history of inadvertently killing 20% of the world's population when we discovered the Western Hemisphere is not very encouraging. And remember that the next time you complain about planetary protection. Unintended consequences are the rule, not the exception in exploration and new settlement. Megafauna extinctions everywhere. Even when you're successful, there's always the possibility of the resource disease. Institutional frameworks are very important. Nothing turns explorers off faster than blurry property rights. And another corollary to the age of exploration was it was also the age of piracy. Nothing encourages piracy like rich cargoes and sparse populations. Development of local ISRU is huge. All the exploring countries did this. They depended upon local resources in advanced bases. And of course, transportation costs are key. I didn't talk about them much this time, but really in the 1500s, you got a factor of 3 reduction in transportation costs. And that actually made possible the exploration and settlement of North America. I thank you.